Hi, welcome back to my channel, Modister Sews. I'm Hannah. Today starts part one of sewing this Myosotis dress from Deer and Doe Patterns. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of the sew along. Today we're going to start sewing up the bodice, including sewing on the placket. Let's get started. Okay, we're going to need 4 of our bodice pieces. We'll need the front piece, the back bodice piece, the front facing, and our collar. If you have to do any pattern adjustments, go ahead and do them. But if you're ready to go ahead and cut out all your fabric pieces that you'll need in these 4 pieces. All right, so we have all of our pattern pieces cut out. I transferred all my markings. I have my darts in place. This is in yellow, so hopefully you can see it, but I did it in yellow. And then I transferred my notches on my arm's eye, and I have my darts in place for my front bodice as well. I'm going to sew all of my dress with a French seam. You can finish your side seams however you would like, but for this tutorial, I will be sewing it in a French seam. If you do not know how to sew a French seam, I do have a YouTube video you can refer back to, and you can see how to sew French seams. If you need helps or tricks with darts, I also have a video on that, and you can refer back to that. Make sure you have your collar pieces cut out as well and your front facing, like I said before. And also make sure you have your inner facing cut out. To prep your inner facing, I use SF101. It's a woven inner facing. I'm going to soak this in water for about 10 minutes and then let it hang dry. It'll dry pretty quickly, but you do this to help prevent shrinking because you don't want to apply this to your fabric and then wash it and it shrinks later, because it will cause puckering and dimpling on your interface pieces. So you want to go ahead and do that, and then go ahead and sew up all your darts, sew the shoulder seams right here, and you're going to sew up the side seams to get it in place. And I'm going to do that right now, and I'll meet you right back here. So we have our bodice all done. We have the shoulder seams sewn up, the side seams, and our darts done. Now we're going to apply the facing. Your facings should already have the inner facing applied to them, like here, and you're going to have both of them interfaced. We're going to apply these right sides together, like so, and I'm just going to pin along this line here, and then okay, so like I said before, we're just going to lay them right sides together, and I like to line the top up nice and neat. And we'll just be pinning along this side. So you want to make sure that you get it into where there's this corner part. You also want to line that up correctly too. Sometimes these need to be eased in, so I'll pin at the top and the bottom, and then I'll ease in the middle. And here I have my one side done. So you're just going to do this to both sides, and then I'll meet you over at the sewing machine and I'll show you how to sew it in. Okay, so we're going to sew this at 5/8 inch seam allowance, and we're going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end of the seam. Remember to make a slight pivot at this corner here. We want to go ahead and clip all of our threads and get that all cleaned up. We want to do this as we go. Now, you might not be able to see the stitching line, so I marked it, but there's sort of a corner here. We need to clip into that, and we want to clip to the thread, but not through the thread. So I'm going to do that right now. And you're clipping the seam allowance right to the stitching line. So it should look like that. I just made that line there so you could actually see it. So we're going to do that on both sides. Like so. Now we're going to press, and what we want to do is, the goal is to press the facing outward, so when we turn it over it will look like this. And we also want to press all of our seam allowance to one side. So I have a pressing cloth here I'm going to use because this is kind of a delicate fabric. So what we want to do is turn this facing and seam allowance to one side. And start giving it a press. And we're going to do that to both sides. So it's going to end up looking like this. So we'll do it to this side as well. Now we're going to take this to our sewing machine, and you can pin this in place if you need to, but basically what we're going to do is we are going to understitch. So we're going to create a new stitching line, and we're going to stitch the facing to the seam allowance. We're going to sew 1/8 of a way from our actual stitching line here, our original stitching line. We're going to sew 1/8 of an inch away, and we're going to do an understitching. This is going to cause our shirt facing to fold under, and we will end up not seeing any stitching line because it's going to pull that original stitching line to the underneath so that it will be a nice and clean finish on the front. Okay, so I'm making sure that my facing and my seam allowances are all pressed to the same side, and the seam allowance is definitely under the presser foot. I'm going to line it up so that I am 1/8 of an inch away from this. I'm 1/8 of an inch away from this stitching line. So I'm going to be stitching in here, but I'm just 1/8 of an inch away from there. While I'm sewing, I'm slightly pulling or making this area tight so that I make sure that this seam allowance is rolling over. It's rolling over this way. So I just slightly give a tug. There you can see my understitching. And now it's going to make this pull nice and clean to the underside. Our next step that we have to do is we have to top stitch the facing to the front of the bodice. But before we do that, you should have already finished your seam allowance if you're not doing French seams. I am doing a French seam, so what I did, I took one extra step. And if you can see here, I stitched a line at about 1/4 of an inch away from this raw edge. And then I simply just folded it onto that line and I pressed it. So this gives me a clean finish on the inside. So now what we're going to do is we're going to flip our facing to the inside, and we will just simply pin this in place, keeping it in place. And then what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch going down. So let me pin this in place. So we're going to sew at 3/4 of an inch from this edge here, and I am going to set my stitch length to about a 3 because I like a little bit of a longer stitch length when I top stitch. Make sure that you are in fact catching that raw edge on the inside while you stitch. See our top stitching, and it's fully encased on the other side. Our facing is now attached to our bodice and complete. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss part 2 where we sew up the collar and attach it to our bodice. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you next time.